Howdy. Welcome to the Burden of Choice podcast. Have you ever wondered why two people can face the same situation and walk away with entirely different decisions? The goal of this podcast is to help us, as fellow humans, better understand the choices we make every day. In each episode, I'll present a scenario, and based on your values, philosophical frameworks, and cultural background, you'll decide what the final choice would be. This is a space for curiosity, not judgment. Every decision is uniquely yours. None of them are right or wrong, just human. And now that you're here, let's step into today's scenario. In Lenovia, there's very little to do. It's a small country, barely 1 million people, tucked away from major trade routes and global ambition. There are no towering cities, no great universities, no thriving entertainment industry. Lenovia exports almost nothing of note. Most people are born there, live there their entire lives. Not because they're trapped, but because there's very little reason to leave, and very little reason for outsiders to come. Except for one thing, the River Rhine. Rhine flows entirely within Lenovia's borders, winding through farmland, villages, and the capital before disappearing into the earth. Its water is clear, cold, and unremarkable in taste, but when consumed, it does something no other substance in the world can do. It heals. Not partially, not gradually, completely. Cancer dissolves. Degenerative diseases vanish. Infections clear in minutes. Old wounds knit themselves together as if they never existed. Even ailments that medicine cannot name are undone. The river does not discriminate between small and large suffering. It simply restores. Because of Rhine, Lenovia has the lowest rate of chronic illness in the world. Because of Rhine, no Lenovian fears sickness the way others do. And because of Rhine, Lenovia learned very early that miracles are dangerous things to treat casually. Centuries ago, when the river's power was first discovered, people drank freely, word spread, pilgrims arrived, crowds gathered, and for a time, Lenovia was overwhelmed, not by violence, but by need. Sick people camped along the banks, entire communities formed around the river. Consumption increased, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the river changed. The water still healed, but not as quickly. The flow weakened during dry months. Sections of the riverbed began to crack. Lenovia learned its first hard lesson. The river was not infinite. So the Lenovians did what they had to do. They regulated. Over generations, laws were written, revised, written again. Guards were stationed, access was controlled, and eventually, a single principle emerged that most of the country agreed upon. Every citizen of Lenovia would be granted one free healing from the river. No conditions, no tests, no moral judgments. On your 18th birthday, the state would escort you to the river. You would drink once. Whatever was wrong with you, whether known or hidden, would be healed. Some people used it to cure childhood illnesses. Some used it recklessly, fixing broken bones or scars. Some chose to wait, saving it for a future they could not predict. But everybody got one. After that, the rules changed. If you wished to return to the river for a second healing, you could, but only if you paid. And the price was deliberately set high. Each year, the government announced the cost, the equivalent to the average Lenovian annual salary. Enough to hurt, enough to make people think, enough to ensure the river would not be used casually. The money collected funded the protection of the river, the maintenance of the infrastructure, and the modest but stable Lenovian government. No one pretended the system was perfect, but for a long time, it worked. Until it didn't, because time doesn't respect fairness. Some citizens developed chronic illnesses after their first healing early in life. Others were born healthy, lived recklessly, and paid their way back to the river when consequences arrived. A visible pattern emerged. Those with wealth, connections, or supportive families lived longer. Those without learned to ration not just their money, but their hopes. Still, most Lenovians accepted the system until a political movement formed. They called themselves the Purity Coalition, and their argument was simple. The river should never have been priced. They did not argue that everyone deserved unlimited healing. That would drain the river entirely. Instead, they claimed that one chance was the only moral legitimate rule. One miracle per life. No exceptions. No money involved. No second chances bought with privilege. Health is not a commodity, they said. A miracle sold is a miracle corrupted. If one's healing is enough to be fair, two healings for some is unfair by definition. At first, the coalition was dismissed as idealistic. Then they grew. Stories circulated of parents watching children die because they already used their free healing, of wealthy citizens quietly extending their lives while others aged and suffered, of a miracle that had become a mirror, reflecting inequality more clearly than any census. Eventually, the coalition gathered enough public support to force a national referendum. The question on the ballot was blunt. Should paid access to the River Rhine be abolished? A yes vote would mean every Lenovian still receiving one free healing, but no one, ever, would be allowed a second drink. The river would be protected, equality would be preserved, and many preventable deaths would follow. A no vote would preserve the current system, allowing paid access, extending some lives, funding the state, and cementing inequality into Lenovia's most sacred institution. And this is where you come in. You're a citizen of Lenovia. You used your free healing years ago. You are not sick. Yet. You have watched friends argue on both sides. You understand the logic of stewardship. You understand the rage at injustice. You know that if paid access ends, somebody you love may die. You also know that if it continues, somebody else will die simply because they were poorer, slower, or less lucky. The referendum will be decided by a narrow margin. Your vote matters. So here's the dilemma. Do you vote to preserve paid access, accepting that health will remain unequal so that more lives, some lives, can be saved? Or do you abolish the payment system, preserving moral equality at the cost of the deaths you could have prevented? There is no third option. There is no future amendment. There is only the river and the rules you choose to live under. And whatever you decide, Lenovia will live it long after you've gone. So choose carefully, because in Lenovia, everyone is given one miracle, and what happens after that is where morality begins. Looking at everything here, let's just analyze the situation. Lenovia does not lack clarity. The facts are known. The river heals. The river is finite. Every citizen gets one free miracle. Anything beyond that must be paid for. The referendum doesn't ask what will happen. It asks what should matter most. And when you strip away the politics, the slogan, and the fear, the disagreements in Lenovia collapse into a much older argument, one humanity has never resolved. An argument between outcomes and principles, between numbers and dignity, between utilitarianism and deontology. Let's take the utilitarian case. Utilitarianism begins with a simple moral intuition. Suffering is bad. Reducing suffering is good. From this perspective, the Lenovia dilemma looks almost straightforward. Paid access to the river saves lives. Banning paid access causes preventable deaths. No amount of moral symmetry can change that arithmetic. Utilitarian reasoning asks us to zoom out, to stop focusing on who benefits and instead count how many benefits. It does not deny that inequality is unpleasant or that selling access to healing feels morally uncomfortable. It simply argues that discomfort is not the same as death. If paid access exists, some people live longer. If it's abolished, those people die. To a utilitarian, that's the end of the argument. They would say, Lenovia did the fair thing by giving everyone one free healing that established moral baseline equality. At that point, refusing a second chance in the name of purity doesn't preserve justice, it manufactures suffering. From this view, banning paid access is not noble, it's cruel by omission. Utilitarianism is ruthless in this way. It forces you to accept trade-offs you'd rather avoid and asks you to take responsibility for consequences even when they feel indirect. If you vote to abolish paid access and someone dies who could have afforded the treatment, The utilitarianism says you are morally responsible for that death, not because you caused it, but because you chose a role that allowed it. The strength of this framework is its honesty. It doesn't hide behind symbols. It doesn't pretend fairness heals bodies. It does not allow moral cleanliness to override real outcomes. But its weakness is just as obvious. Utilitarianism struggles with its limits. If saving more lives justifies selling access to healing, why stop there? Why not auction priority access? Why not reserve the river for those who contribute most to society? Why not sacrifice one to save many? At some point, the logic that reduces suffering begins to erode the idea that individuals matter in themselves. And that's where deontology steps in. Deontological ethics start from a very different place. It asks, what is inherently right or wrong regardless of outcomes? For a deontologist, the problem in Lenovia is not how many lives are saved. The problem is that health has become conditional on wealth. The river is not a hospital. It's not a service. It's a miracle. And miracles, they argue, should not be priced. From this perspective, Lenovia's payment system commits a moral violation the moment it allows money to decide who lives longer. If paid access saves lives, even if it saves many lives, it does so by crossing a line that should not be crossed. The river was meant to equalize fate, not amplify advantage. Deontology insists that some values, like human dignity, equality before the sacred, the right not to have one's life appraised, are not negotiable. You cannot trade them away in exchange for better statistics. If someone dies because they cannot afford a second healing, that death is tragic, but allowing money to purchase miracles would be a different kind of tragedy, one that corrodes the moral foundation of the entire society. From this view, banning paid access is not cruelty, it is restraint. It is the refusal to turn life itself into a commodity. The strength of deontology is its clarity. It draws bright lines and defends them even when doing so is painful. It protects individuals from being sacrificed at the altar of efficiency. But its weakness is equally stark. Deontology can look cold in the face of suffering. It can appear more concerned with moral consistency than with human lives. To someone watching a loved one die to a treatable illness, being told that at least the system is fair feels like an insult. And so Lenovia is stuck. Utilitarianism says, how can you accept deaths you could prevent? Deontology replies, how can you accept a world where money decides who deserves to live? Neither side is confused. Neither side is acting in bad faith. They're simply answering different questions. The hardest truth is, there is no framework that solves Lenovia cleanly. Utilitarianism says more lives but risks moral erosion. Deontology preserves dignity but accepts preventable deaths. Every compromise creates new victims. Every purity creates new graves. And perhaps that is the final lesson of Lenovia. Not that one framework is correct, but every moral system hides a cost. And maturity begins when we stop pretending otherwise. The referendum is not a test of ideology. It's a test of honesty. Which costs are you willing to live with? Which regrets can you carry without lying to yourself? In Lenovia, everyone is given one miracle. What happens after that is where philosophy begins. This is the burden of choice. Choose wisely. I'd love to know what you have to say in the comments, or let me know how you decided. I would love to know.